Gordon, are you? Brilliant. Hello, everyone. We are really excited to have you here for the Geochemistry Group's second careers event. Today, we're going to be talking about careers in publishing. We have three fantastic speakers for you here today. But firstly, just a bit of background about us. So the Geochemistry Group is a special interest group of the Geological Society and the Mineralogical Society. We're here to promote geochemistry as a discipline, but also to support early career geochemists. Having said that, if you're not a geochemist or you're not early career, that's absolutely fine. And we hope that there's something here today for everyone. So a little bit of housekeeping. You should have all come here through our link sent out via email. And in that email, there would have been a link to our code of conduct as well, which you should have familiarized yourselves with. But if not, please do so now. Please be respectful of each other. And if you could keep yourselves muted and your cameras off for the duration, unless you're asking a question. So to ask a question, you can either put your hand up using the little hand icon or drop it in the chat, and we'll hopefully get round to everyone. So a little bit more about the event. Doing a PhD, we tend to be surrounded by other academics, and it can be a bit difficult to get a sense of what alternative careers might be out there. So the point of this series is to showcase the range of careers available to us as geochemistry PhD holders. We have an event lined up next month as well. So we'll be talking about careers in the public sector. That'll be on Wednesday, the 24th of November. So keep an eye out on our Twitter and Facebook for the sign up for that. But today we're here to talk about careers in publishing. So I'm going to introduce you to our fantastic speakers. We have Dr. Tessa Davu, Dr. Brent Grocholski, and Dr. Erin Scott. So starting with Erin, Dr. Erin Scott is a senior editor at Nature Reviews Earth and Environment. Her PhD at Durham focused on constraining the uplift of the Andean mountain belt, particularly by tracking changes in the geochemistry of Andean arc magnetism over time. After her PhD, she went directly to Nature Communications as an associate editor, handling primary research papers in the broad remits of geochemistry, geomorphology, and tectonics. She worked there for about 2 years before moving to Nature Reviews in 2020 to focus on commissioning review and commentary articles in Solid Earth. Dr. Tessa Davu is the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Leiden University and Leiden University Medical Center in the Netherlands. In her PhD, Tessa modeled sailing speeds and routes for Viking Age ships at the University of Cambridge. During her PhD, she held a doctoral fellowship at the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology in London and worked on the student-run academic journal Archaeological Review from Cambridge. These two experiences gave her an interest in publishing. After she finished her PhD, she worked for a number of academic publishers in the UK and the Netherlands in books and journals. In her most recent role in publishing, she was responsible for a portfolio of geochemistry journals at Elsevier. Taking her publishing experience with her, she now works as an open access publishing advisor for researchers at Leiden University and Leiden University Medical Center. And our last speaker today, Dr. Brent Grocholski. Brent is a senior editor at Science magazine. His PhD was in high-pressure mineral physics, looking at the viscosity of planetary fluids and the amorphization of crystals under high pressure at the University of California, Berkeley in 2008. Brent conducted postdoctoral research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and then became a Peter Buck Fellow at the National Museum of Natural History, Smithsonian Institute before joining Science in 2014. In his role as physical science senior editor at Science, he handles research papers across a wide range of subdisciplines in earth science, materials science, and applied physics. He spends most of his time reading submitted manuscripts, working papers through the review process, handling commentary pieces, and editing manuscripts for clarity and readability in Washington, DC. Phew, so big welcome to our speakers. Thank you so much for being here today. And to start with, we're just going to ask you to sort of summarize your role and maybe give us a bit of an example of what a typical day looks like for you. And Brent, following on from that, I guess, was a bit of a summary of your role. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to hopefully share some insight and get you excited about maybe joining us in the world of publishing. I basically did a lot of, I did like 6 years to get my doctorate, 6 years of postdoc experience, and that sort of gave me a broad breadth of interest that actually lent itself well to my role here at Science. Because there's only about 30 of us editors at Science, we are asked to handle a wide range of different topic areas. And so, when we get into what my day looks like, is I never really know because I come in and, the editor in charge of sort of dealing with all the submissions that we get basically assigns manuscripts to all the editors here. And so I could see anything in my task list ranging from, geomorphology to, thermoelectrics or ferroelectrics. And my job every day for the most part is basically looking at those initial submissions, basically trying to figure out which ones would be competitive for the very limited space we have at a top tier journal like Science, and then working those papers through the review process, the few that we actually decide to send out for peer review. And so I handle everything from that initial submission process, that initial decision, all the way to arranging and interpreting the reviews, and then finally, editing and help shepherding that paper through the final parts of our process to get it into print. And then there's always some stuff afterwards. Sometimes I try to push things to get covers or try to help connect authors to places where they can promote their work. We have a press office here at Science Magazine. And then, of course, there's the associated, complaining, and appeals that I get in my email, along with other random requests. And so, every day is a little bit different. A lot of it is reading manuscripts, commenting on manuscripts. But, it makes for a very interesting job in that I get to see lots of different things across a lot of different areas.
Thanks, Brent. Erin, you're at Nature, Springer Nature. What does your typical day look like, and what does your role consist of?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'd say my previous role at Nature Communication sounds very similar to what Brent just described, but now I'm at Nature Reviews Earth and Environment, which is a review-only journal. So my role now kind of is much better to describe on a week-by-week basis, I think. We commission articles, so we look into certain topics. It's a bit more research-led, so we research the field, identify trending topics, either by citations or stuff that people are interested in at conferences. And then we would approach certain authors and ask them if they're interested in writing a review for us, or a commentary article. And then we kind of develop from there. We do take some proposals as well, but it's much more commission-led. And then we would take those papers through the peer review process, and we're a lot more involved as editors. So we provide editorial feedback at each stage in the manuscript process, because we handle a lot less papers, say, than I did at Nature Communications. So we're much more involved with each paper. We have an in-house art team as well. So as an editor, I work quite closely with our art editors to help the authors develop their figures. And then we conduct press releases as well for the reviews. And then after they're published, we'll look into promoting them on Twitter, WeChat, different social media channels, and talking to the media about these. And then we'll promote kind of the content to the community by going to different conferences or organizing lab visits. So there's a lot of discussions one-on-one with different authors as well. So I'd probably have quite a lot of meetings week on week with various different people, either about their review or about kind of something that they might be interested in doing further down the line.
Thank you. And Tessa, so you're currently working in the library at Leiden University, so maybe a bit of a different perspective. How does your role compare to the others? And I know you have previous experience in another publishing house, so please feel free to bring that in as well.
So I think it's nice to join everybody. I think also it's kind of fun to have a role that deviates a little bit from Brent and Erin, because I've worked as an editor at PLOS One, where I was handling the papers, but most of my experience with publishing is a little bit more broad than that. It's dealing with either whole books or whole journals, or dealing with editorial boards and a bit more of a zoomed out role. So my daily task as a publisher, as well as other editorial or publishing roles that I've had, actually wasn't necessarily reading papers. It was much more dealing with, the larger running of a journal, or the management of, at one point I had 12 journals that I was managing, and so it's managing people, it's managing a production process, dealing with a lot of, I can definitely relate to a lot of complaints and questions. That was a big thing that I dealt a lot with. And so really that kind of zoomed out look at publishing was useful, or it is useful now in an advisory role, because a lot of authors are not necessarily aware of how a whole journal works or how it fits together. So I get questions, how do people get on editorial boards? How do people, okay, a review process works, but how exactly does it fit in with the whole editorial process? And I find that really useful now in my advisory role. People are going to start publishing a paper, and they kind of like, where do I begin? How do I find a journal? How do I find, where do I want to go? And I found it really useful to have that more zoomed out view, as well as a bit of a knowledge how the obviously detailed day-to-day paper handling, but the zoomed out view of what makes a journal, what makes it tick. And that's really what it's kind of a funny role that I have now, because some of it is more zoomed in, helping people with individual papers, and some of it is much more broad. We've recently done a big project on editorial predatory publishers. So looking at what makes a bad journal, which is funny. You'd think you'd spend lots of time looking at what makes a good journal, but it's also been really important looking at what makes a bad journal and how do we advise people to stay away from them. And that's where my background in more zoomed out publishing has helped, is like, I know how a good journal should fit together. I know what an editorial board should look like. I know what reviews should look like. And even just things like marketing and that sort of stuff, I've looked at it before. So for me to spot a predatory publisher is not very difficult, but I can understand from a person who only submits a few papers a year, that's not so easy. So it's quite a varied role that I have now. And I get lots of really random questions, which is fun. And that's one of the main things that I probably do day to day at the moment, is answer questions. So people really come to me with questions. And based on those questions, I'm slowly starting to build up different sort of events that we have with information sessions or posters, or even things on our university website. So it's really a broad mix. It's based on what people ask me.
Brilliant. So thanks all for giving us that background. I think we'll kick off and jump straight into the audience questions that have already been sent in. So a reminder to everyone here, if you have any questions that you want to ask our panelists, you can just drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. So to start with, this one that was sent in previously, what are the most important skills gained from a PhD for your industry? So I guess what skills that you earned in your academic experience that help you now, and maybe also if you feel like you can comment on what things would make someone competitive for a career in publishing. And feel free to jump in, any of you. Or awkward silence. Tessa, you're, oh no, okay. Erin, you just unmuted. So
no, Tessa, you can go.
I think this is one thing that, again, I suspect Erin and Brent will relate to, is communicating with difficult people. Communicating with people who are at the top of their field, and they are, kings and queens in their own department. And they are, the top person you need to talk to, and really talking to people, and, not getting bowled over when somebody sends you quite a rude email, but just being able to communicate with people at different levels. I think that's been really useful, because at least during my experience as a PhD student, I had to ask people for a lot of things, because I was doing stuff that was completely new to me. So there was lots of asking people, can you help me with this? And lots of getting no's. But certainly that communication aspect of it, and dealing with, people who may not be so adept at communication themselves.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I'd add that just kind of taking any opportunity that gets thrown your way as well is really good, like showing that you have a really broad range of skills in scientific communication, in organization. Like, it's really important to have really good organization skills for an editorial job, because there's constantly things coming in on your desk. And I think there's a lot less time to do like maybe tasks that are a bit more easy on the mind, like shifting through data or kind of cleaning beakers or stuff like that. They're a bit more like your brain can switch off a bit and you can relax. In a publishing job, it's quite brain intensive, like constantly you're looking at manuscripts, providing feedback, replying to emails. So on a kind of day-to-day basis, there's a few less tasks that you can kind of switch off when you're doing a little bit. So yeah, I'd say organization is another big one. But yeah, during your PhD, it's really good to like get involved with different societies, show that you've got a broad range of knowledge and like a broad range of interests as well, I think is really good.
Yeah, and I'll point out that the obvious thing that's helpful is to, you go through the publishing process as an author and, paying attention to that. And if you do have an opportunity to review a manuscript or, if you're really early on, you can ask your advisor to sort of help review with them. We get those requests pretty frequently where they'll bring in a grad student or a postdoc to help review something, just so you can see how that process works. I mean, that said, it's, I didn't publish in science and I still got the job in science. So it's not super critical, but, having some experience with the actual publishing process, I think everyone will by the time they're done with their doctorate, and being really engaged in it and recognizing that it's, kind of sometimes a clunky, difficult process can help you, definitely helps in terms of trying to understand how to act in my role as an editor, for instance, to try to, smooth that stuff out as much as I can. But
brilliant, thanks everyone. So the next question that I'm going to follow on from with that, I know, so Brent, you've had sort of the additional postdoc experience. We have you've sort of joined a range of places in your academic career. Are you an editor for papers within your primary expertise, and sort of what's the process for branching out, I guess? We spend so long on a PhD focusing on something that can feel super narrow, and then, is it a bit intimidating to maybe be faced with a wider range of papers, or is that something that you picked up along the way?
Yeah, so I had a pretty relatively broad background because my back, basically I ran experimental measurements, which were effectively, measuring material properties. And so that kind of gave me a base to understand lots of different stuff. But, now I handle far more papers outside my expertise than I do in my expertise. And, as something Erin said, my strategy when I joined science was to say yes to everything. So whenever, my boss basically said, hey, how do you feel about handling fluid mechanics? I said, send those papers my way. And honestly, you just have to kind of get into them. I mean, you have to try to learn the field, learn the players, and probably the more logical way to do it is to start with your core expertise and then start branching out from there. But in the end, in terms of assessing publications, a lot of it is kind of a similar sort of process, whether you're super familiar with the topic or not. And the most important thing is that you try to get a good sense of where the field is at. And then try to figure out, if a paper is at the cutting edge of that field or not. And it takes a lot of work to sort of move to basically take those initial steps into a new field. So it's a little bit of a steep learning curve, but once you kind of get over that hump, it's pretty easy to start understanding what the next advances are. But yeah, I mean, it's a process. And I think in the end, what you end up finding yourself is you're sort of a mile wide and an inch deep in a lot of topic areas. But that's actually not a bad place to be, because then you can kind of start connecting things across these broad topical areas. But yeah, I've always found it interesting to look into different topics and stuff like that. So I was very, happy. And I think for a lot of us in the publishing world, if you want opportunities, you're going to need to be flexible, because where the opportunities aren't necessarily going to be exactly in the areas that you're the most familiar with. But we all have a scientific training and a scientific background, and so you can definitely use that to sort of move into some of the topic areas that are adjacent or close to the ones that your training is actually in. And it's uncomfortable at first, but it gets rapidly more comfortable as you move along.
I'm seeing a lot of nods from our other panelists. Do you have anything to add?
I think I'd second what Brent just said about it doesn't, a lot of publishing, it sounds like you need very specific knowledge of what you're doing or of the topic to really be able to help people develop their paper or their book. I mean, I've worked in physics publishing, archaeology, mathematics, geochemistry, and now medical research. And those are not necessarily fields that I have that much knowledge in, but I do have knowledge of what a book should look like, and I do have knowledge of what a paper should look like and a journal should look like. And then it's surprising how similar a lot of those quality marks are across different fields. And there's also points where you know that you need help, and that's also knowing the limits of your own knowledge and when you need to ask a field specialist. And that's something, again, we've all probably done in the past, ask a specialist, and that's not a bad thing. But knowing where your limits are, but also just, you know, giving it a go and identifying what you can.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. And one good thing about the publishing world and just how the peer review process works is you're not making these decisions on your own. And that's actually different than, you know, some academic research where you feel like a lot more like you're responsible for everything. You know, I still work with a team of other editors, and, you know, we have, you know, external people that weigh in. And so that's part of the way we can do what we do.
Brilliant. Erin, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so like from the primary research point of view, I definitely agree with everything Tessa and Brent have said, and also add that it's really interesting kind of, I don't know if there's a bit of feedback there. Yeah, to add to that, like I think it's really important as an editor to take a step back from a paper when you're assessing it editorially, and it's the main thing that's drilled into us, especially during your training as an editor, is to not look at a paper like a reviewer. You have to assess the advance of the paper and the novelty. You're not necessarily looking at the in-depth technical detail. Obviously, it has to like support the findings, but that's the thing that you want the reviewers to look at. And as an editor, you want to make sure that the paper is going to be an advance, and the reviewers and your audience are going to be excited about it. And then for review articles, I think another thing that's interesting to mention is that as an editor, we're actually here in the reviews part. When we're editing reviews, we're kind of bringing in a non-specialist opinion, because we want our reviews to be accessible to people from PhD level and upwards, so that if you're given a review on, say, like something in geochemistry, like core processes, or like core differentiation, you want someone who works on volcanology to be able to understand that as well. So when you have someone who's like top in their game in the field, who's writing this review, they might forget some of the things that is kind of second nature to them because they've been studying this for 20, 30 years. And so we're there to kind of in our edits provide that non-specialist background, say, oh, this sentence might be unclear to non-specialists. You might need to like bring in some less jargon or define some further terms and stuff like that.
Brilliant, thanks everyone. So next question, also sent in previously. What made you choose publishing as a career? So Tessa, I think maybe we'll start with you here, because you know, you seem to have an interest in publishing before you even completed your PhD.
To be honest, it just sounded like fun. You know, I know there's probably some sort of, oh, I considered it all things, but the bit of experience that I had of journals and publishing, it just sounded like something that was interesting and fun to do. And if you're thinking, especially your job, I mean, as you know, with your PhD, you spend all day doing it. You're going to want to do something that you're interested in. So really that's just the aspect of it sounded like fun, and I can't get made more technical than that. But the second aspect that really appealed to me is that it really is a team effort. I did a lot of my PhD research on my own, completely by myself in a lab, usually either somehow in tears or, you know, desperate for help. And publishing is a really collaborative enterprise. I think both Erin and Brent have mentioned that, is you work closely together with people in different departments or different editors, people in lots of different fields. And that really appealed to me as well, as you work together. You're rarely taking a manuscript and doing something with it on your own. In fact, that would be really weird if you did that. So the team part of it really appealed to me as well.
Who wants to come in on that next?
I think for me, it was actually a bit of a coincidence. Like I had this idea during my PhD that I wanted to go outside of academia and into either sort of science communication or publishing, and that I wanted to kind of broaden the science I was exposed to rather than specialize further. So I kind of had that idea in my head when I was writing up. And then it was actually through a contact that I was made aware that you could actually go into editorial straight out of your PhD, because I think I would have never have known that personally, and I probably would have never applied for the job at Nature Communications if I hadn't have known someone that was already in the company and had done the same thing. So I think that was really useful for me to know that I could apply and that I was eligible to. So I think that was what gave me the confidence to apply for the job. And then the more that I looked into it, the more I kind of decided it was something that I was really interested in.
Yeah, so for me, I was actually, you know, I am based in Washington, D.C. I was actually here before I took this job, and I was actually looking for jobs in science policy. And part of that was because I wanted to try to maintain a lot of the academic contacts I had actually, you know, made over the years. It felt, you know, like kind of a waste to just dump all that and move into something else. And as I was looking for science policy jobs, this job at Science appeared, and so it was better than science policy in terms of maintaining the academic contacts. And you know, I was really excited about the idea of being able to, you know, learn about a bunch of different topics, you know, since I knew that'd be part of the job. And yeah, so that basically was a reason that I ended up here. It wasn't really intentional, but you know, when the opportunity presented itself, you know, I did my best to, you know, work my network to make sure that my resume, you know, got to the people that I needed to get to so I could get an interview for the job, which, you know, I think is always important if you're looking outside of academia, is to try to make sure that when you do find something that you want to do is to let people know and try to work that network, you know, to get where you need to go.
Brilliant, thank you. So moving on to another audience question. Are there any restrictions on non-native English speakers who might be considering a career in publishing?
I might jump in on this one, just because I've had a number of roles that don't require you to be a native English speaker. You know, obviously, if you're going to be doing content editing and, you know, editing of English language, then it's probably good to have a pretty good grasp of the language. But in a lot of other publishing roles where you're not, maybe you're not customer or author facing, production roles, you know, if you're in things like marketing, and these are all, I never realized before starting publishing how much marketing is actually involved in the content of a journal or a book. And whether that's, you know, in an art department or whether that's doing different things. So there's lots of roles that don't require you to be a perfect native English speaker or have a very strong grasp of English. I mean, it's always helpful because you do need to communicate with your colleagues at least. But there's lots of different roles within the publishing world that don't necessarily require you to be a text editor. I also think, at least from my own experience, even when you're looking at scientific content, if you're not going to be editing the language, but you're able to read and understand English very well, that's also fine in my experience. If your own written English is not that good, but you can understand it perfectly well, and you can judge the scientific content, that's not necessarily a barrier either. That said, it is something worth working on, and it's something, if you would like to work in a communications role, take an English course if you want to. There's lots of different academic and professional English writing, reading, speaking courses. And I've seen colleagues do that as well, and they've really benefited from it. So it's something, if you want to do it, you can always learn.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And especially at Nature Communications, when I was an editor there was a much less emphasis on editing articles. It was much more about reading them, understanding them, assessing the advance. And there was a huge number of editors were non-native English speakers, like from all over Europe, China, and everywhere. Yeah, so we had, like, in our earth science team, I think we had 2 native Germans, 1 native Chinese person, and then a couple of people from the UK. So we were really international, and not everyone was a native English speaker. So yeah, I think having a good grasp of the English language is definitely important, but it's not essential. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. Like, you know, we definitely wouldn't categorically, you know, cross out anyone that's a non-native English speaker. It's more about having a good enough grasp on English reading and writing. You know, like a lot of publishing places, we have copy editors that, you know, make sure things conform to our style and stuff like that. So, you know, it doesn't need to be perfect, you know, when you accept the paper. And so, yeah, you know, obviously if you're having, you know, issues with the reading and writing, that could be become an issue if you're looking for a role that's more directly author facing. But yeah, being non-native English speaker isn't disqualifying in any way. So.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. So moving on again, obviously the last sort of 18 months have led to a bit of a shift in how many of us work. And now in various places, things are starting to maybe shift back the other way. So are there many opportunities for working from home? And I guess we can't expect any of you to forecast anything necessarily, but if there has been improved flexibility, do you think that might persist, or is there going to be an imminent permanent return to the office?
So I can jump in here. I'm actually in the office now, but I don't have to be. I would say that my organization historically has sort of been a little bit, they oscillate between being looser and stricter on if they want people in the office. Maybe what is more important is when they want us to be available. And they tend to want us to be available on sort of 9 to 5 East Coast time. And that's because there's, all sorts of people, art production in-house here on the East Coast and in the DC office. And so I think that it's hard to forecast what the organization will do. I suspect we will be more flexible on sort of working from home, but I don't think that what will change is the sort of expectation that you're sort of available across certain hours where the bulk of the workforce that you need to interact with is around. And so yeah, flexible for location, yes. Time, I think it's a little bit less clear.
Yeah, it's the same for Springer Nature. So even before the pandemic, we were able to work from home 2 days a week, and then we were going into the office 3 days a week. But you could go in all the time if you wanted to. But yeah, there was that option to have the 2 work from home days if you wanted them. And then now I've actually not been back into the office yet. So I'm in the London office, but there are offices in Berlin, Shanghai, and New York as well. And usually the editorial teams are quite spread across the different countries. But yeah, I think the new plan is like this new normal when pandemic eventually hopefully ends, is that we'll then extend our work from home days as you can option to take 4 work from home days if you want to and just go in once a week. But still it's very flexible right now and they're not forcing anyone to go back, but the office is open.
That sounds pretty similar as to what they had at Elsevier. Again, also offices all over the world. There was a general expectation that you would be in the office most days. And some people had different arrangements, and it was really, I think it also depended on the local culture. I remember that the people in some of our US offices, they had to go in every day and some of them didn't. In the UK, it was different again. And in the Netherlands, well, in the Netherlands, they have an extra problem is that everything's done by collective agreement, and there's a publishing collective agreement. So there's a union behind you. So that also helps things. But there was a flexibility that just basically increased when the lockdown started here, that because most of the jobs you could do from home. But then when I looked at it personally, even though most of my team was based in the UK, so I was never with them anyway, or rarely with them, I did actually really like going into the office at least a couple of days a week. Because like I said, publishing is collaborative. You can do everything behind a screen with a keyboard, or almost everything. But sitting next to other publishers and editors is also inspiring in a different way. And it does give you something. Or, when the production colleagues from India used to come and visit, they used to come in teams, and just to sit with them and ask them how things work. There is something to that you can't really replace with a call. So there's definitely a value to it as well. So I know some people would love to just stay at home in warm sweaters and type all day, but there is actually a value, I feel like, to going in, or at least meeting with people on a regular basis, because that's the point of publishing to me.
Yeah, I guess I'll say one more thing, because you sort of realize this as you're involved in places that have HR departments, is that work from home doesn't necessarily mean work from anywhere in the world. Like places need to establish tax presence and stuff like that. So you can't just assume that, oh, I can get this job and work from home, so I can move to wherever and I'll be fine. Sometimes you have to actually negotiate that with the human resources, and if the organizations or the company is willing to make that work. And so, if you do get a job anywhere, really, not just in publishing, that's something to think about, is that those discussions have to happen, earlier rather than after you've been hired. So.
Great, thanks everyone. So I'm going to move on now and ask some slightly more probing questions. So for academics considering moving to a career in publishing or even just outside of academia, I know we touched a little bit on, taking advantage of just any opportunity that comes up as a way to sort of strengthen your CV. But do you have any further advice for people who are looking to make that leap?
I have one of something not to do, and that is not to undersell yourself. That means you don't have to go for the complete entry-level jobs. Like Erin said, you can step in quite, in middle of the ladder and work your way up, or even quite high on the ladder. And Brent, it sounds like you stepped in on a very nice rung up that ladder. You're capable of quite a lot already. I had one company, it wasn't a publishing company, but it was a different one, which I ended up luckily not working for. They said that my time in school, which is PhD research, was not counted as work experience, and I was only eligible for the entry-level positions. And I said goodbye to those people. But no, you're perfectly capable of stepping in at a reasonably, mid-level to senior position, and also negotiate for a salary because you have quite a lot of knowledge and ability. I made the mistake of not doing that at least 2 companies. I've had a couple of different experiences, and people will try to push you down and say things like you were in school, you weren't working, and that sort of thing. But there's no need to undersell yourself, because whatever company says that it's not worth putting you in at a higher position or allowing you to have a decent salary, those companies aren't worth working for. So definitely value yourself.
Yeah, and I think that, what I'd say in terms of, positioning yourself for getting into the publishing industry, as I said before, it's important to work your network and talk to people that are already doing this, like find professors that are, editing journals or, stuff like this. And because half the battle that we have when we actually advertise positions is trying to get people to recognize that we have a position open, and that often often you'd be surprised that that sort of connection between the job opening and the people that are qualified and interested in the job doesn't necessarily happen. And so, the more people you let know that you're interested in this particular career path, you'll find that people want to help, and they'll basically, help connect you to people that are closer to, the publishing world, that will be able to sort of know when there's positions open and can help, guide you into those. As I said, usually the most they can do is help get you to an interview, and then the rest is up to you. But getting that interview is really important, because that means that you're on a short list of people that could get the job.
I think in terms of doing stuff during your PhD to help as well, I think I mentioned it earlier, but it's good to emphasize, is just doing as much as you can to add things onto your CV. So I think, like, when I was doing my PhD, I got involved with loads of different societies. I helped on the organization committee for the department for a couple of different things. So like, get involved with different organizations, show that you've got good communication, management, and even leadership skills if you can lead some society. Try and get involved with different conferences. Lots of the different conferences like AGU and EGU have press officer internships and that kind of thing. They're really good to get involved with, and they show that you've got interest in scientific communication, and that you're willing and able to put yourself out there. So just try and get involved with as many opportunities that you can find. Just have a look on the internet. There's loads of different internships and things that you can get involved with.
Brilliant, thanks. So just a reminder to our audience, feel free to send in your questions either to me or to just pop them in the chat. We are getting close towards the end of our time. I'm going to make sure that we stick to time in this hour. I'll just ask another question from me. So what opportunities or experiences do you find you have in your current role that maybe weren't available to you in academia? How, sort of, I think sometimes the jump from academia can be like, oh, this is, get to do research, you get to collaborate, you have all these fantastic things. But have you found something in your current role that you wouldn't have had if you'd stayed? So tricky. Yeah, Tessa.
Should I go into this one? My major feature that I noticed, because my partner did a postdoc and I didn't, is stability. So when he had his postdoc, we were in one place for 3 years, and our housing and everything was connected to his postdoc. And then when it ended, he lost his job and his house. So what I've really enjoyed working in publishing is that I feel much more in the driver's seat of deciding when I would like to move jobs or take, choose jobs. And I think that's stability that I certainly didn't notice in archaeology postdocs or different roles. Lots of them were time limited, or they were part-time, and different things that you couldn't actually live from it. So I feel like stability, and then the ability to make your decisions, saying I'd like to work here. Obviously, you got to get hired somewhere, but once you're there, to just really be in the driver's seat of what you're going to do and how long you'd like to stay, whether it's short term or long term.
Yeah, I think definitely stability is a big factor. You've got like less of that niggling worry, like, oh, where am I going to go next? Do I need to move country? Do I need to relocate? Where's my next job coming? So that's really, really nice. And also, I think having that exposure to the breadth of science, I think I mentioned this earlier as well, like when you're in a PhD, you're so concentrated on your little area, which is great as well. Like that's super, super interesting. But I think I really enjoy like having that spread of different topics to dip into. And then kind of with commissioning as well, like I can really research into something I'm super interested in and that other people are super interested in. And I can like identify the person that I think is best able to write something on that and then develop the idea with them. So it's a lot more collaborative as well. You've still got that kind of research and collaboration aspect, even in the publishing side of things, and like expanding your network, like Brent mentioned as well. You get to touch base with so many different people from all over the world, and that's really, really nice.
Yeah, I'll second the stability comment. I think I didn't really realize how important that was until I was in a job where there was like no end date, and it was a little hard to wrap your mind around. But I moved for 2 different postdocs, and when my second one was going to be up, it's like you never know what you're going to do next. And so I very much appreciate that. I've gotten to travel a lot internationally, which has been really fun, and you sort of get to do it in a way that's a little bit different than like going on vacation, and it's pretty amazing to be able to like be hosted by these really influential academics, and sort of be able to talk to them and see what they think about things. And then I think the other thing that's been really good about the position I'm in is if I ever do decide to move out of publishing, the types of jobs that I can get from here are just a lot different. It's a lot more very much more broader in scope, maybe on the funding side, or again, science policy, stuff like that, or management positions, stuff where you actually have more influence on how the direction that the scientific research is going, rather than doing the research yourself. And so it's an interesting place to be, and a really exciting place to be, I think.
Brilliant, thanks everyone. It's interesting to touch on sort of careers after the career in publishing, which it's good to hear about. So we are coming towards the end of our time. Do any of you have anything else to add? Like, if there was like one message you were going to give, what would it be, or any sort of like parting advice or guidance?
So I'll just do it. My advice, if you're interested in publishing, is there are many jobs besides being an editor. Editor, of course, is a very important and central job, but it's also not for everybody. But that doesn't mean publishing isn't for you. So if you'd like to be in publishing and involved in making science public, but you wouldn't like the role as editor, consider other roles as well. Especially with bigger companies, like my experience with Elsevier, but I know that Springer and other big companies will tend to have lots of different kinds of roles and ways you can be involved in publishing. So maybe when you're having a look at vacancies, or you're just having a little snoop around, just look at what other jobs require or what they offer, and you might find something really, really interesting in case an editor job isn't for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And also, just be confident as well. I think that's a big thing. Like, don't ever undersell yourself, like Tessa mentioned before. Always just, if you're interested in a job and you think you're passionate about it, just apply, go for it. The worst that can happen is that you decline, but then you've got those skills from that application. Especially if you get to the interview stage, you learn a lot about the job and the process through that interview. So really use the interview to your advantage as well. Because essentially most interviews will kind of test you on the day-to-day process in the job to make sure that you're happy with it as well as they're happy with what you're doing as well. So use the interviews and sign up for as many jobs pages and alerts as you can.
Yeah, I guess I'll just reiterate something that I said before. You know, I think that, you know, if you decide that you really want to go into something like publishing, it's really important to let people know that and start building your network to help you get into the career that you want. And you know, that goes for anything. And sometimes that's the hardest part, is deciding what exactly you want, because we all have the skill set that's useful for lots of different things. And so I agree with what everyone else has said. Don't sell yourself short. When you do get a position, negotiate salary. Don't feel awkward about that. That's what the human resources department is for, is to do that negotiation. And, you know, just like have confidence and you know, we're all very valuable. I mean, there's not that many people with doctorates, and, you know, it's a hard thing to go through, and you gain these skills that are really, really unique. And so, you know, everyone will be successful. You know, just got to figure out exactly like what that path looks like for you.
Fantastic. A really huge thanks to all three of you. That was absolutely brilliant. I think I would hand over to Mark Alban to close.
I think I actually had a small question for you guys. It's actually, what do you think are your perspectives on the evolution of your roles, and how could one evolve within the publishing industry from where you are now, for example?
Yeah, I can go first. So, you know, I think for me, there's you know, there's obviously pathways where I would evolve out of the publishing industry, which I already sort of mentioned. For me as an editor, the most obvious place to go in publishing is to basically move up a level and start, you know, managing a journal, like, you know, being an editor in chief and taking on more of the sort of you know, nuts and bolts of running a group of people and running a team. And you know, that's you know, for my position, there's not that many more places to go in terms of working my way up, in terms of doing the sort of basic editorial functions. It'd just be different if I would move to a different journal. But that's probably for me would be the next logical step in the sort of career arc. And you know, I've been at Science for 7 years, and so I'm pretty familiar with the ins and outs of the sort of management side. You know, at this point, I see what my boss does, and you know, like you get a sense of what you need to work with. So.
I guess, Mark, you noticed, you saw me actually transition out of the publishing role. I was a publisher on a journal that Mark works on. I'd say, so I've done a sidestep at the moment into more an advisory role about publishing, as opposed to really being involved in the publishing itself. That doesn't mean I couldn't go back to being a publisher or an editor, but I think that's something that there's a lot about publishing that's really valuable to know, again, for institutes and for universities. So you could either, let's say you spent a few years as a publisher or as an editor, you can always decide to use that knowledge, as I have, and bring it to, you know, an organization that may not know something so much about the ins and outs of publishing, and that's really valuable. So it's really just you're taking information with you. And you can move into lots of different things, but like at the moment, what I found really helpful is knowing how publishing works and translating that for people who need to publish but don't necessarily always know the ins and outs of what a publishing house actually does.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. And I think, yeah, as an editor, you can sidestep into different journals or into different roles quite easily once you're in a certain company. So, for example, my colleague Laura, she's currently on a secondment at Nature Comms just for a few months, covering someone else's maternity leave. So there's a lot of opportunities like that, or going into like Nature Comments or Nature News and Views. So they have like specific editorial roles just for looking at comments or news and views articles or stuff like that. Or you can just try a different journal like Nature Geoscience or Nature. But then, yeah, you can also go into the managerial role or kind of more the data management as well. If data is your thing, then there's a lot of jobs in publishing that look into like the statistics of stuff that is being published and what the competitor journals are publishing. So yeah, lots of different things.
Thanks very much. And yeah, no, so no, thanks very much, really, Tessa, Brent, and Erin for this. This has been really great. And thanks very much for your time, for all of this and generosity. So yeah, I thank everyone for attending. Yeah, so this has been recorded, and I guess this will be up on YouTube and our website, the Geochemistry group website, very soon. Yeah. Okay.
I think